Welcome to this video from Sezoo, powered by 460 Degrees. In this video, we feature a conversation with Drummond Reed. On August 13th, 2026, Sezoo had the opportunity to meet Drummond Reed, a highly influential expert in the field of digital trust. Fresh from his keynote at the New Zealand Digital Identity Hui Taumata, Drummond shares his perspectives on digital trust and his work on the first-person project, network, and cooperative. You can find links to the references mentioned by Drummond, Joe, and John at the end of this video and in the description below.
Can you hear me? Okay, can you hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, so my name is Joe Spencer. I'm from Sezoo. Before we start, I'd like to obviously acknowledge the country on which we're joining today. It's the country of the Wurundjeri and Wirrawong people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. With us today, we have Drummond Reed, the big kahuna as far as digital identity is concerned. Drummond, I understand that you've come from New Zealand, and you know, what are you doing here for 36 hours or so, isn't it?
36 hours in Melbourne. That's going to be a New York Times article, by the way, in 36 hours. Yeah, no, it was my first visit to New Zealand and my first visit to Melbourne. I have been to Australia before, but yeah, I was invited down to keynote there. Digital Identity New Zealand has an annual conference, the Digital Trust Hui Taumata, and it was a fabulous experience. The whole thing. I learned so much about what they're doing with digital identity and in New Zealand, and you know, I was there to talk about things that we are developing. The two of you are two longtime contributors to Trust Over IP, a project we started 7 years ago at the Linux Foundation, and I'm very involved in the sort of the latest wave of what we're building there. And I didn't know how relevant it would be to their work on digital identity, specifically digital wallets, digital credentials, the trust framework that they put in place over the last 2 years. And it turned out to be incredibly relevant, and particularly I was also learning a lot about the Maori, how they're interacting and being incorporated into all of that. And it turned out to be highly relevant to that too. So it was extremely engaging. And besides, it's a very beautiful country.
So you were saying something last night that this is like 34 years you spend in this sort of focus on this topic. And so the first person project is not your first rodeo, right? So how would you describe how you got here? What were the kind of key milestones along the way to get to the first person project?
Well, I'm going to leave out the first decade of working on early stages of user-centric identity, and the second decade on federation. And you know, we were even talking about Internet 2 and Shibboleth earlier here with the folks attending. But really, the whole stage that we now refer to broadly as decentralized identity, and I still use because I co-authored a book of the name self-sovereign identity. All of that in this last decade has sort of laid the groundwork now for where we are, and the building block standards for self-sovereign identity, decentralized identifiers. 7 years of my life on that specification from the first version to W3C standard in 2021, and verifiable credentials, which don't require DIDs, but they're much better with DIDs, right? Which is actually now had its second generation approved at W3C. Those are the fundamental building blocks that have been our attention for the last decade. And I'm happy to say, in decentralized identity, although there have been a lot of skeptics and a lot of pushback because it is a paradigm change, just like federation was a paradigm change, it is now really starting to, there's real success stories starting to happen out there. And, you know, preview, guess what's pulling it forward into the future? AI. All of the, interestingly enough, even though I've done work at Oasis, a lot of W3C on those standards, starting with Trust Over IP 7 years ago, we moved our standards work to the Linux Foundation. And there were a couple reasons for that. But one of the major ones was speed, right? We were working on emerging standards. We needed open source implementations. Almost any internet infrastructure needs that. At the Linux Foundation, you can do both simultaneously, and they have the setup for it. So when we, as you two gentlemen recall, we set these basic building blocks. There were like half dozen of us that said, we don't just need those building blocks. We need to assemble them into a protocol stack for decentralized digital identity at scale, at internet scale. And therefore, we modeled that after the TCP/IP stack, 4 layers in the TCP/IP stack. And we knew it was going to be a long game. It was going to be a 10-year journey. But we're 7 years into that journey now, and the results are starting to show. And now that means we can build things that I'll talk about more, the decentralized trust graph, that I think are finally actually going to kick in the network effects that are going to take us to what sometimes I call the internet of trust.
Yeah, and that sort of takes us to that question about why is this one going to work, right? I mean, we have been talking about this for a while now. It feels as if there's a bunch of factors maybe that are making this more likely now than it was before. You mentioned AI. Is that one of the key catalysts from your perspective?
It's time.
Sorry.
I'm understanding that's a famous phrase from the pastor. No, I feel it is time because the benefits of decentralized identity, just inherently architectural benefits, are now coming, they're pushing this direction. And then the demands of AI agents, agentic commerce, we've already been discussing that here at lunch too, are now pulling it forward. Mm-hmm. And the way I like to put it is, with SSI, my younger son lives in LA. I'm from Seattle, but he lives in LA. And yes, he's become a surfer. He lives in Venice Beach. And the waves there, they're 3-4 footers. They're good for beginners like me to learn. That's what we've been surfing with the world of SSI for the last 7-8 years. And now we're on if it was Hawaii, we'd say the North Shore. And then if we're in New Zealand, I think it's the East Coast. Where is it? Where's the big
PR Beach in the
yeah, exactly. That's the analogy that we're using.
It's Bell's Beach here, probably.
Yeah. Bell's Beach here.
Yeah.
We're surfing the big one, and I like the analogy because we have the surfboard. We hope we have enough skill because either we're going to surf the best wave ever or we're going to get crushed.
But at least you can get back on that wave.
Oh, that's true. That's
comes on.
Yeah, it's not like
it's a reasonable.
Yeah, so I think AI is now completely pulling this forward, and I'm happy to go into. I know we can spend the whole rest of this time talking about just the one thing of how, with the first person project, we were focused on solving a proof of personhood problem, so that then we can connect it to the proof of agent problem, also called know your agent.
What's really interesting, Drummond, is you've obviously been through the journey of going from centralized, federated, decentralized, and you're still committed to the decentralized model. Nothing has shifted your sense. You've actually just felt that it's more likely to be useful going forward,
Absolutely.
than ever before. The challenge with different protocols, different technologies, and you've also you bet on DIDCOM, you bet on Ferris-Stivner, and now we have the trust spanning protocol within TOIP, which is the piece of work that I was very lucky to work with you on that. But the challenge that we have is the coordination of, say, formal identity frameworks and informal, if you like, more flexible, informal identity frameworks. Some governments have done it one way. You worked in Bhutan and did the digital identity framework and rollout for them, and now you're going away from the national grid to the completely informal, sort of semi-informal sort
you
of.
might call it
is that what you're seeing, that join up because of the way in which decentralized works?
Yes. I'll give you a very structured answer to that question, which is with decentralized identity, I've had the opportunity because of Evernym and actually the book of all things. Bhutan came about because of the book, because little known, the king of Bhutan is relatively young, Western educated, really was pretty jazzed about blockchain, and it turns out Bhutan's second biggest export is hydropower. And as a result, he felt they were in a very good position to do Bitcoin mining at scale, and it's become a major source of income for them. So when they were looking at modernizing, digitizing government, they didn't have a digital identity system. They were looking very closely at OpenID, and then the book came out. Literally, they got in touch through LinkedIn and said, we'd like to talk to you about, Bhutan adopting SSI as a national digital identity infrastructure. And they were quite serious. I didn't actually end up helping them with the technology. That was Andy Tobin, another very good friend, both yours, and worked closely with at Evernym. But once he had them up to speed on the technology, they said, oh, now we get the other half of the problem. Both of these gentlemen know the trust RP stack is not just a 4-layer stack of protocols, it's governance. Can't have trust. Technology alone does not produce trust. You have to have governance. They said, oh, we need the governance half. And that's when they asked me to help with that, because I co-chaired for the first 2 years a governance stack working group at Trust RP. And we got about 2 months into it, and they said, we don't just need a governance framework. We want to write this right into the legislation. And so I spent 8 months helping them draft their National Digital Identity Act. I think it's the only one in the world where SSI is formally supported directly in the legislation, and it was passed unanimously by the legislature there. We convinced them well enough. It was the best.
And it's up and running?
It is up and running. And I think it's one of the great success stories out there that they do have a government wallet. They support private wallets, but the government wallet, they have issue a credential into that. The interesting enough is biometric verification. So they do have a biometric database, not unlike Aadhaar. But that database is only used for enrollment and to issue that credential to the wallet. Right. They wrote into it. I want to talk to Utah at some point too, because they were enlightened enough to write into the national digital identity legislation. After that credential is issued, it's illegal for the government or anyone else to surveil the use of any credential in that wallet. Right? It's like we are responsible for issuing that, standing behind that credential and the biometric that verifies it. The use of that is totally up to the citizen and cannot be surveilled. Anyone who does that, going to jail.
Yeah, and let's go to Utah since you mentioned it, right? So the state-endorsed digital identity system for Utah, I think, is for all three of us, probably others in the room maybe as well, is a truly kind of enlightened piece of legislature. It's great. I encourage you to read it, which I would seldom do for legislature.
I'll send the link at the end of it.
Yeah, but it starts off with these very profound principles of sort of citizens' rights.
Digital Identity Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems as if it's taken the kind of Bhutan model and gone even sort of like the next level.
Yes, it has. I think, well, Christopher Bramwell, who's the chief privacy officer of the state of Utah, and sort of the lead, they have a great team leading that in government. He acknowledged that, yes, they look very closely at things like Bhutan and other, the European Digital Identity Wallace Initiative. And but they wanted to do two things. They wanted to simplify it in terms of how readable and relatable it was, especially to their legislations, but also to U.S. citizens and actually broadly. That's why that starts with the Digital Identity Bill of Rights. And please do read that. It's more readable than our the U.S. Bill of Rights.
It's very simple.
It is very simple, very easy to understand, and as a result. Everything follows from that. And besides basically saying the whole idea behind state endorsed digital identity is the state does not give you identity. The state says you have an identity and you have a set of attributes. And if we can verify those, we will endorse the identity you bring to us. That is the essence of, really what it comes down to is you create your decentralized identifier. You have the keys behind that. Now you want a credential that you can use to prove to others, I control that, and the state says this is really me, right? Bhutan effectively did that, but they didn't. They wrote the right to control your identity into the legislature, but they didn't make it quite that explicit. Mm-hmm. But Utah took one step further that effectively the Bhutan legislation did, but they didn't make it as clear, and that's that they said, any verifier of that information, anyone who asks for information related to that credential, has a fiduciary duty of care for that information. That means they can take that information, but it doesn't matter what their privacy policy or their terms of service say. Under Utah law, that information cannot be used in any way that's not in the best interest of the individual.
Sure.
And that is a regulatory requirement now. And that is a huge step forward in really putting regulation around not just individuals to control their information, but now giving them a way of enforcing that with others who need that information to do things on their behalf.
One of the things I find fascinating about that work from Utah is it kind of counteracts this potential expectation that words like self-sovereign identity that we used to use a lot, decentralized identity, the principles of the first person project and so on, feel like they're anarchic, anti-establishment, kind of like that kind of thing, right? But what you see in Utah is the embodiment of that thinking, but actually within a government sort of endorsed program. So it's like you can kind of have your cake and eat it. It's like you can have your individual identity, and we'll as a government will join in. We'll give you a credential that recognizes you as a citizen.
And they're specifically reflecting that as this is the government doing what the government's supposed to do in the United States, which is protect your freedom and protect your rights as an individual and as a business entity, right? They're trying to make sure this is a healthy environment for the exchange of that information, versus something with the government. I mean, it's the dead opposite, the government imposing and surveilling on its citizens. And Utah, some folks may not be aware, it is a pretty red state, but not completely red, right? Because of how clear this was and defensible it was, as this is, the aligned with things like the U.S. Constitution and the things Americans hold dear. Both of the legislative initiatives have happened last year, unanimous approval. That almost never happens in the U.S., especially these days.
So it sets the principles about how this is going to evolve going forward. How does it work with the other states? In effect, it's a lovely. Is it an island of goodness, or is that?
That's a great question.
To...
So one thing folks might be wondering is, well, why Utah? Where's the federal government in this, right? Federally controlled digital identity, let alone digital identity, is a non-starter in the U.S. It's part of that independence thing. We call it the third rail. Just don't touch it. So what Utah needed to solve the problem in Utah, but because of a confluence of factors, including the fact that it was sort of the home of SSI with companies like Evernym and Dr. Sam Smith there with Kerry and all that, they said, we want to solve the problem there, but because we won't have federal identity, the best thing is for states to get together and get behind how to do this. And this is where Christopher and his team, I give them a lot of credit. They have done this amazing job evangelizing it. They put together what they call a SETI consortium. And at the third SETI event is this November, they want to have 20 US states. The governors have signed onto this consortium. So their model legislation is going to work its way through. They want to get to half of the states in the US, I think by the middle of 2028. And then, see how, but their argument is, doesn't matter red or blue, this is the right way to do it. The more states that get on it, and then the more credentials that start to get issued, this is going to be a great thing. U.S. might even catch up to more progressive countries.
Well, like New Zealand, maybe?
Unevenly distributed, isn't it?
Well, we'll talk about New Zealand, because I think New Zealand is in a good position to take the next step beyond that.
Like leapfrog. I want to drill down a bit into the first person project and the kind of way it works, right? Like, how does it actually work? I don't mean that in the level of detail about cryptography or whatever else, just about the principle you've described before about establishing a connection, and you build trust from that. And this, like, you mentioned trust graphs. Tell us about
Yes. So the most basic sort of the thing that got it all started was the problem we were focused on. One of the reasons it's called the first person project is that there's a long-standing problem in digital identity online called proof of personhood. It has other names, but that's become the most popular name, and that is the name of the Wikipedia article. And I reference that because if you want to understand how hard it is, how long it's been going on, how many solutions have been tried, go read that article. It is really, there's a long.
I'll send the link.
Yeah, somewhat, it's really is fun. So what was making that much more urgent was at the Linux Foundation, open source projects anyone can contribute to. They were starting to have malware injection attacks because, and they weren't initially they weren't AI driven. They were just very clever hacks to try and get malware injected into popular open source projects, including a utility for the Linux kernel. This great Wired article about this, the XZ utils attack, you should read. When that happened in 2023, it just scared the pants out of the Linux Foundation and the executive. And they said, we need a solution with this decentralized trust stuff you're talking about. We need it ourselves. You guys are developing the standards, developing the open source code. What do we do? Well, that intersected with work that coming out of Trust over IP, we had recognized the conventional view on the value of digital credentials is they work the same way the credentials in our wallets do, right? They come from trusted issuers, and then we can show them to verifiers, and that's the trust triangle. It doesn't reflect how much trust there is in our relationships, right? Person to person, right? I've met or shaking the hand of almost everyone in this room. I have a lot of trust in people in this room because of these two gentlemen who I've known for a long time, right? That's how trust works. Who in this room is issuing credentials to whom else in this room? Okay. Now let's flip it around. How many folks here have connected with someone else in this room on some network? I mean, let's say LinkedIn, Signal. How many folks have done that in the last 24 hours, right? One quick question. I actually want to see hands with a QR code.
Whoa.
None of you have done it with a QR code?
No.
Okay. How about the last month? Do you know that every single one of those networks except iMessage allows you to do it with QR code? And the funny thing is, if you do it in the US, it'll generally be LinkedIn. If you go to Bhutan, 100% WhatsApp. They don't even think about doing LinkedIn. Next week, I went to a conference in China, 100% WeChat. They don't even think about anything else. I thought, okay, that's it. My brother lives in Tokyo, so I stopped there one day on the way back. And I met with a team from NEC, an executive team, and I was telling them the story. I was like, this is, because of where I'm about to go with this. And they said, oh, yeah, we get it. Everyone does that here in Japan online. I'm like, oh, my God. 4 weeks, 4 completely different. Right. And so it makes it obvious. Why can't we issue credentials and form connections directly between each other? Right? Wallet to wallet, agent to agent. And when we were saying, how do we have a proof of personhood? Well, there's no better proof of personhood than people connecting with people. And we said, if we want to do this and not have it be a global biometric database like World and World ID, have folks seen the orb?
Yeah.
Is anyone willing?
Our scans.
No one in the room willing to say they've actually been scanned by the orb.
We know anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I never asked that question of audiences because no one's willing to admit that they've done it. Anyway, that Sam Altman was so concerned that proof of personhood could cripple the adoption of AI that he is a co-investor in World. A biometric solution tied to a blockchain tied to a cryptocurrency controlled by one company. What could go wrong?
Yeah, that's a brilliant
Perfect
idea.
idea.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, let's do proof of personhood, but let's base it on relationships. And we said 2 kinds, actually. Person to person, and we call those verifiable relationship credentials. Person to community of any kind. And that's membership in a community, right? 460 degrees here. We call that, because we couldn't come up with a better word for any kind of a community anywhere of any size, a verifiable trust community, or VTC. 460 degrees, verifiable trust community. Okay. City of Melbourne, verifiable trust community. What's your name of your neighborhood?
South Melbourne.
South, verifiable trust community. Australia, verifiable trust community. Okay. Anyway, those 2 fundamental types of credentials, which by the way are extremely simple, if you're all familiar with DIDs, decentralized identifiers. If I was to do that with Joe right now, his wallet, my wallet, scan a QR code, his wallet generates a key pair and the DID and the document and sends it to mine. Mine verifies, it actually came from my QR code and does the same thing back to him. We now have done the key exchange, same thing that happens with PGP Web of Trust.
Old school.
Old school,
Old school.
only at that point, the two wallets and agents say, I've got both pairs. I'm going to put my pair together, date stamp, sign it with his private key, and issue me the verifiable relationship credential. I verify that and do the same thing back to him. We now can verify we have a real relationship person to person. If 460 Degrees here said, oh, we're going to set up a verifiable trust community, some group of you that run it would say, we're going to set up an agent. That's one thing. We talk about wallets. I think where we're going, every wallet has an agent. Every agent has a wallet. Okay. So you set up a wallet agent for 460, and you now, when you could say, oh, well, any two 460 people that you can either just say someone is going to start saying these are all the people in it, or you can have it more organic, like what we're going to do with the Linux open source projects. And if you can go to that agent and present two verifiable relationships with someone else in the community, great. They'll issue you a membership credential. Now you can prove you're a member of that verifiable trust community. Take those verifiable trust communities, they start to agree on governance, and you have verifiable trust networks. That's what's in that deck that Joe showed before.
You have no idea how close the DNA of 460 Degrees you've just described, actually. I think Vernon's smiling, but we used to have a passport program where people used to walk around and get their passport stamped by having met other members of 460 Degrees. It's sort of not a rite of passage, sounds too dark, but it was actually a sort of positive process of learning about the others in 460. But I want to go to a sort of another point. So so we've got these circles, and we've got the key exchange with all of the sort of I guess the details of how things are working.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why that doesn't work for government as well. It's like this is an and, isn't it? This is a thing, and it's not also a platform that I guess the other thing I was expecting people to say, oh, I can do that with WeChat, I could do that with LinkedIn, I could do that with WhatsApp. What's different for me creating a signal group, right? And the thing is, they're all platforms. And if you haven't read Cory Doctorow and Chitification, you should, because all platforms tend to a certain destination, which isn't fun.
But they can play as well. I mean, so if they wanted to, I mean, you know, it's a network open to all to play. The question is,
That's why
where does it go to when
the model? I was very careful in all the talks I do now, and especially in New Zealand, to emphasize the model for this is the internet.
Yeah.
Okay. The internet. No one came along and said, "Oh, we now get the internet, and you can join it by joining me." Right?
AOL tried that.
Well, exactly. So this whole thing of protocols, not platforms. I mean, that's the essence of decentralized identity right there. Now, the really powerful thing about that, and now I'll tell the deeper story about New Zealand that completely surprised me, which is I was there to explain this to them, to say, hey, there's this sort of next dimension of what will self-sovereign identity. It still uses wallets, still uses credentials. It's all, there's not really new technology involved there, but it's a new way of deploying it into these, with agents. And by the way, those agents do not have to be AI agents, but they can be AI agents or one node in the network. As they get smarter, just imagine how strong, because those are all trust networks, right? Everything starts with trust. So how much more can those agents do if they can, just it's built in this verifiable trust infrastructure. Because I was talking to Digital Identity New Zealand, and specifically the Trusted Credential Adoption Group, TCA, right? They're bringing 6 credentials to market, and they're trying to, by the end of the year, under their trust framework they've adopted 2 years ago, right? But they're still struggling with, okay, but what's the case? Every one of those credentials has a two-sided market problem, right? So they're trying, and by working together, I think they're doing the right thing by trying to sort of, aggregate the value of it. But when they heard this idea of, oh, what about if people using those credentials could also connect peer-to-peer, start creating trust communities of their own or modeling them, and you could get to these other value propositions between those agents and communities. They were like, oh. But what really resonated was there's an issue there. It's probably well known over here of, the Maori and indigenous rights and protecting their community and their culture. And if you were going to say, well, we're going to have one digital identity system for the whole country, and of course the government's got to buy into it and everything. That just creates a hard problem to solve right from the outset. When they understood, and there were several Maori leaders at this whole thing, when they understood, it's like, oh, we can have our own verifiable trust network, and the government can have their own verifiable trust network. And actually, several of the commercial entities there, like Casco Paymark was there, realized, oh, we can have our verifiable trust network. And it's like the internet. They can all interoperate. They can all decide who else they need to trust for what. They were like,
and they could do that as well as everything else that they do.
that's what it's and with a capital A.
Yeah. And I know we're at the sort of time of the half hour, which I knew we would run out of so rapidly. But that was exactly that. There are people from University AAF is here. We've got some medical research people on the line as well. Government people. This is an inclusive thing, not an
Highly.
Yeah, it is an and with a capital A.
And it complements, and I would say enhances the value of any traditional credential that would be issued by any traditional authority in this decentralized SSI model. But it now adds this ability for the agents and the relationships to gain so much more value. I mean, the one basic thing, by the way, this is not theoretical. This has been implemented. A group from Harvard has already implemented a wallet that does this. Harvard had a big event to launch it in March. There's an open source project at the Linux Foundation called OpenVTC that is presenting to the Linux kernel team at the Linux Plumber Summit, first week of October in Prague, for them to start using. This is not, just go play with this, right? The team, there are when you're doing something that the Linux kernel is going to use, you can attract the best developers in the world. Like, oh, I'm going to give something Linux kernel, right? And Linus's number 2 guy, Greg Crow-Hartman, was assigned to us by Jim Zemlin, the CEO of the Linux Foundation. They have been using a traditional PGP Web of Trust where you have to have your key signed by 2 others in that Web of Trust in order to contribute to Linux kernel. That's how important it is. They've been maintaining that in one Git repository by one Linux Foundation employee for the last 20 years. It's a manual process. And when Jim Drummond heard about this, he's like, finally, we can replace that with a new modern way to do this. That code base we have been working on with like I said, these, by the way, all volunteer developers. No one's getting paid on that project. They're all just like, we're going to solve this problem for them. Number 2 is Kubernetes, the second largest project they have there. And then they want to roll it out into LFX, which is based on GitHub, for the whole of Linux Foundation, all 1,500 projects, 3 million developers. That's an adoption, a way to market.
We're sort of running out of time, and I appreciate everyone online. It's great to have you there. Thanks a lot. If anyone's got any questions, both here or there, please, jump in, because it's not just about us; it's about all you guys as well.
And the good news for those that are here is that Drummond's staying for at least 30 plus minutes from now, so you can ask questions when you switch off the network if you're less shy. But if you're online, you can post it, and by all means share to Joe and I. Will follow up with Drummond very happily if it doesn't happen right now. So I guess
thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Drummond. That was a rattle through 36 years of learnings and what you're doing now. So
well, I want to, for everyone here and online, acknowledge these are 2 contributors to TrustRP from the start, right? Way back when it was much more speculative of the impact we have. And Joe in particular, with the trust spanning protocol, that was a real slog to create the standard protocol for any 2 nodes to be able to establish a cryptographically secure connection. Okay. You were a key contributor to that.
On the shoulders of great men.
Well,
to be honest,
such a great architect. But the interesting thing is, DIDCOM is much better known.
Yeah.
About 2 months ago, the primary folks implementing DIDCOM at scale finally ran into, well, I'll just say some of the scale issues we predicted they would, and they said, okay, we're switching over to TSP. Now they're going to support both for a while, but anyway, that protocol stack, if you haven't paid any attention to it, it's coming, and we can solve a lot of problems with that. So thank the 2 of you. This guy's chapter in the book is the most readable of the whole thing. Yes.
How to explain SSI to CEO and CEO.
Yes, exactly. I point people at that all the time.
Right. Fantastic.
Good stuff. Thanks very
Okay.
much, Drummond.